For session two of the June 24 Widening the Pipeline virtual training, many early career journalists today are sharing that chasing trending news topics in the current media environment is making them rethink their careers. While they're still strongly committed to journalism, they're losing the connection with community that led them to choose that career in the first place. But could making a shift to audience engagement help restore their vision and energy? Our next speaker will be taking us on a deep dive into that topic. Nicole Hernandez is the news editor for digital and audience engagement with AP. Before AP, she spent 6 years as an engagement editor and a supervising editor at NPR. Nicole says her early childhood years in a cosmopolitan environment in Athens, Georgia, taught her the importance of community and global connection. I think that's a great way for us to start our conversation with Nicole. So, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here and be part of the journey.
Now, I remember our first conversation where you explained just what you meant by saying that your earliest life experiences help prepare you for the work that you're doing today. So, why don't we start with that and let you take it away in your presentation?
Absolutely. Yes. I will queue up the slides right now. And really what I want to start off by saying is you are an engagement journalist. This is a realization I came to in my own journey as a practicing journalist pretty early on. We will definitely discuss more of it. But I want to preface it by saying I was born in a town called Royston, Georgia. I'm curious how many people know where that is and what that is about. And I was born to parents from the Dominican Republic in a part of Georgia where many people did not know where the Dominican Republic was. But I was raised my first 5 years of life in a community where we had neighbors who were from Iran, Poland, South Korea, India, Ethiopia, from the United States as well, all over Latin America. Um, and so for me, just deciding to become a journalist, a big part of it was realizing it's about these people. It's about that audience and that connection that I still hold very near and dear to my heart. So I would like to bring y'all into the community too, and to take a little bit of a step back, even within journalism, what are some of the reasons why people pursue this craft? So I know for me, some of the things that I've encountered, it's about holding the powerful accountable, a voice for the voiceless, informing the public. I have encountered some people for whom they wanted to make sure their face was always out front. But none of these reasons are going to happen unless you are engaging with the community, unless you are aware of what their needs are, what their wants are, how they're trying to survive and get through the day. So this is what happened. These are my parents, as I was describing, in the traditional folkloric dress of the Dominican Republic. And that is me as a baby, not yet realizing, oh, wait a minute. I have already entered a community. I have already entered a space where at the time it was critical for all of us to come together in this student international, it was housing for international students with families. So that was the glue that brought us and bound us together from all over the world. My father was pursuing his PhD in genetics, evolutionary biology, and my mother made the move with him, and I was born sometime later, and then my brother. So for us, for just those formative years, we didn't think twice about just people speaking very different languages, eating all kinds of foods, having very different celebrations together. The probably one of the fondest memories I have is celebrating Children's Day, which is a holiday in Japan, because a very dear friend of ours, Hamasha, that was a tradition that he had, and he wanted to share it with us. And so we would celebrate Children's Day together. Um, and just sort of as I was growing up, realizing, hey, we're all trying to deal with this commonality of getting an education, trying to raise families, trying to figure out groceries and things like that for the kids. And all of us are coming in from different cultural lenses of how to address that. But we are in this together and doing it. So for me, just going into journalism, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a reporter. That's the way to do this. That is the path. So I graduated from college. I did not like any of my graduation pictures, so I'm not showing those, but this was a poster they made for me when I graduated. And I started in Jacksonville, Florida, as a reporter. That was my official title. The focus was breaking news, and especially in Florida, as you can imagine, it's a lot of definitely the police beat, but also event coverage. This is at a massive marathon that is the 26.2 with Donna to fight breast cancer. And it's a very much a community focused event where people participate to raise funds to fight the disease. And just eventually over time, though, I realized, oh, yes, I enjoy reporting. I also really like data. I also really like thinking about what is the presentation on the website. How are we from events like this getting the information to people in real time rather than the print cycle? I was at a legacy print organization. So eventually I built my skills in the digital production space, very specifically around like homepage presentation, social media engagement. And I went to the Boston Globe. The timing of it was interesting in that 6 weeks after I joined the Boston Globe, we had a terrorist attack. And so just for me as a person, still getting used to a new city, a new geographic area, all of a sudden we are thrown into a very serious situation. Uh, but again, community, it's about those connections that people helped navigate, not just for myself as a new person in New England, but also as someone who had not really had to deal with an event like this at that level. And after that time at the Boston Globe, just really honing the craft around how to understand what is the audience your organization, yes, currently has, and also the audience not being served at the moment. That's when I joined NPR in 2017. One of the unspoken perks of NPR is you get to go to the Tiny Desk concerts. So this is me with Juanis, who is one of my favorite artists of all time. But it was also an opportunity where we could really have conversations and develop ideas around starting to reach that global audience that I desperately, desperately wanted to bring forward, to bring into the fold ever since I was a child. Reminding everybody that, hey, people all over the world are trying to find joy, are trying to do better with their futures, the futures for the other people in their lives as well. So one of the projects that I was really fortunate to work with at NPR was Where We Come From. A look at the stories of immigration, a look at the stories that people carry forward and how they do that through language, through food, through festivals. Just how do we keep those connections going, and how do they change over time? Because you are, for the immigrant experience, you are in a new country. And then AP. So at AP, which is a global organization, I've been at the Associated Press for a year. I just scheduled a call with someone who is based in Mexico City And last week, had to coordinate some logistics for a call with our colleagues in Europe. That is a big part of my life now, that global community and better understanding of the internet has given us this power and ability to connect people that before we were not able to, or that it was very difficult to achieve that. I definitely remember when I was that maybe a little older than that baby. I do not remember her as a baby, but I still remember we would have to keep the cards in order to be able to call the Dominican Republic for a little bit cheaper. These like calling cards that you could get from the colmado, from like Latino stores that they would have, to try to make it easier for you to keep those connections going. And I bring all this up to illustrate a few points. Number one, we're all human beings. We all started at a place before we became journalists of saying, how do I navigate the world? How do I want to share that with the world? Where do I want to develop? And what are the connections I want to keep in the communities I want to be part of and carry that forward? And your audiences still care about that too. Like that is still part of it. And I know a lot of you maybe right now feel like, well, how exactly to get into audience engagement journalism? A big part of the way of doing that is by understanding you already are. You are already doing that. This is a little bit of this is a funnel from betternews.org that I think is really critical to understanding just how it is that people decide to keep coming back, how it is that the model is set up so that people, first of all, just even like know your organization, know the work that you're doing, and then how that leads into, hey, I want to keep coming back, and then looks at loyalty. How do I make that subscription decision? So that is something, if you are looking to also be part of, if you're exploring that avenue of how do I become an audience engagement journalist, first of all, you already are. And second of all, this is more on the business side, the metric side that comes up. So understanding when someone talks about the reach, when someone talks about return or pages per session, those are some of the key terms that you'll hear. Understanding when someone starts talking about, oh, they subscribed, they are doing recurring donations, especially for those of us at nonprofit models, and the renewal as well. So this is a big way of, this is really critical to just sort of being able to be part of those conversations and understanding what people mean when they say these things and visualizing like there is sort of this funnel effect that happens. And for those of us who are practicing in what the industry right now is very specifically calling engagement journalism, this is what we're talking about, of trying to figure out like, okay, how do we, yes, have reach and develop those relationships with the communities we are reaching. So I know probably not everyone gets exposed to this early on. I wasn't until I got to the Boston Globe. And so that's something I want to make sure to talk through a little bit more with y'all here today. And honestly, these are probably some of the things that you're doing right now when I say you are an engagement journalist. When you're thinking through what's a story pitch you want to make, how often do you ask yourself this for a version of this question? What are the 1 to 2 sentences that you're going to say to somebody who is not already in the know, assuming that you're in an outlet that is not like specific to journalism? And by which I mean there are some organizations out there where their audience, their community that they want to engage with are other journalists, right? So the language, the way you want to report out that piece is going to be different. So how often do you ask yourselves these questions, right? Like, what am I going to say to somebody who is part of this community, or is not, but we are trying to engage with them? what is that? And the reason why I say 1 to 2 sentences is because that's your lead. That's, potentially your hook. That could be your headline. That could be the social copy, to really pivot it to. I think I know for me, especially when I was, I'm going to be a reporter, I'm going to be very specifically, I wanted to be a wartime correspondent, very specifically. Um, what is the thing? What is the takeaway I need the audience to have, or that they're supposed to get from this, from my video, from my podcast episode, from the interview? Like, what do we need to make sure is clear? Art, especially like in not even just in digital spaces, for anyone who is working in an environment where there's like a print product, or if maybe the end state that you're working toward is a flyer or a pamphlet or something like that. What's the art? Like, we love we love visuals, like as human beings. We love to see eyeballs. Eyeballs are very, very important. So do you have the art that helps show the story, that is the story oftentimes, right? Recently we had the All Eyes on Rafah on Instagram, related to the Israel Hamas war coverage, because there is a community online who wants to make sure that we do not forget that there is a war happening. Rafah very much is a center of a lot of the focus on that. And then understanding, with your audiences, the National Press Foundation has a really great write-up in May. If you missed that, just saying, take a look of not just Google Trends, but also other Google tools that can help you take a look at, I want to work on a story about X topic. You can even drill it down to a lot of countries. Not all of the countries of the world, but a good number of them. For example, we very often at the AP, with the UK election, will specifically look at what are people in the UK searching for and trying to understand when it comes to the elections that are coming up there for July 4th. What are the angles? What are outstanding needs that we can help address, and how do those fluctuate throughout time? So engaging journalism, just like that journey to engagement journalism, and being in touch with your community. What does that look like in practice? Not just, sort of talking about it in some of the practical, just like tips and questions we talked about, but just like, what can that look like? For anyone who's not familiar, there is Documented Semanal. It's a New York-based nonprofit newsroom with a focus on the immigrant community, the Spanish-speaking immigrant community, and they have a WhatsApp newsletter that they do every week. Semanal is weekly, where they send out like, hey, here's the latest of what's going on. Here are some resources in the New York area for members of that community. Inheriting. I am so just like I love this so much as a news consumer. So the Where We Come From project that I worked on at NPR, that evolved further at LAist, and they've just dropped Inheriting, which is like the next iteration. And it really is taking a look at the family level conversations around like, how does one decision affect change? I very much would recommend Emily Kwong's episode. She's the host of this podcast, but she herself does an episode with her father about a decision that was made for him to stop speaking Mandarin Chinese at home, because at the time it was decided that English would be better. And so what were the ripple effects of that throughout their family? That included Emily herself. The Texas Tribune, a little bit more of this backstory here is that as the reporters were going into this neighborhood to report out issues and concerns around air quality and environmental impact, they asked people in Cloverleaf, I believe is the name of the neighborhood. They asked people like, how do you want to get this story? How do you want us to engage with you? That's a question I think is we forget to ask, or we just sort of assume, oh, put it online. And what was interesting is the responses were actually uh, something that, is analog, that people wanted like flyers, pamphlets of some kind, and they worked to translate it into Spanish too for this area. It looks like, a package that the Baltimore Banner partner with the New York Times local investigations fellowship, taking a look at how a community that is 60% African American, as far as the latest census figures, what the impact has been on the overdose crisis, where, the overall landscape and narrative around this coverage, it could have been very easy to lose sight of that. Um, of what does that look like, and especially in a city with the history that Baltimore does. It's also remembering events and trying to find like how have we moved forward from that. With the marathon bombings, this is from an anniversary page that they did for the 10-year. And just for me personally, like it is something I still think about, just how do we commemorate and not forget a community. There's a strong running community also with this family of Martin Richard. He was the youngest victim who was killed in the attack. They have really built a legacy because he was known for a sign that said peace, like give world peace, and of just trying to keep that going. Engagement journalism is journalism. It's journalism. And you are journalists. I'm a journalist. So we're all engagement journalists because it connects back to that audience all the time.
I feel like this presentation is such a reminder to me that as men and women of color in this industry, again, it's almost as if, and I don't want to overstate anything, but we come prepared to do engagement journalism. As I said to you during our first conversation, Nicole, 40 years ago, when I entered the Clearwater Times, St. Petersburg Times newspapers, Clearwater Bureau, no one was covering the Black community of Clearwater. I mean, it just almost was just as though, why bother? Because there were no staffers of color. They felt that they probably wouldn't get any revenue, ad revenue from that community. And to be quite honest, they sort of saw it as, well, the only news that comes out of the community is crime. Something horrible happens. So we cover the crime beat. So whatever. So long story short, that's a message. If you could unshare your screen, maybe.
Yes.
That's a message that I want to, over this years of working with the Widening Fellows, is to absolutely drive home to them. In so many ways, we bring a set of lived experiences, insights, access that so many newsrooms today simply don't have. And what is so incredibly ironic to me now is that the elevation of audience engagement in newsrooms right now is in part because these communities have been overlooked for so long. Am I right when I state that, or is that overstating it?
I think there is absolutely a relationship to the fact that we are recognizing more and more and I'm speaking as someone who has worked in a lot of those similar spaces as you have, Rachel, where the assumptions of leadership were from a very specific lens. and the recognition that within the United States specifically, but also with globalization, with the rise of access to information and smartphones, uh, there really is there is no you can't there can't be a business case anymore for saying what they said at Clearwater. Oh, it's only crime that comes out of there, and that like that's all we should care about. That wasn't true then. That is not true now. And I think with the rise of wanting to put a label on engagement journalism, is a big part of it is in recognition of the fact that with all these digital tools, we can show you, it is much easier to now show somebody in those senior leadership positions on the mastheads, you are missing out, either purposefully or unintentionally, these stories, and you are flattening experiences in these areas and making decisions on assumptions that data do not support anymore.
Another thing that you and I talked about was the fact that, again, 40 years ago, had I attempted to do some of the outreach that is involved in audience engagement, specifically, for example, with the Texas Tribune project that you referenced, I'd have been fired. They'd have said, you're getting too involved in the community, journalists are supposed to keep arm's length and whatever. So could you share with the journalists a little bit about that specific project and why you mentioned it?
So that project, for me, what really stood out, there were two things that stood out about it. Number one was the fact that there was an analog solution. And I do think I do think that we should not be so quick as to assume that we know best for these communities of what they need.
Can you give us a quick overview? It was about air pollution, right? Give us the sort of thumbnail about.
Yeah, so the TLDR version is the Texas Tribune. They were looking at how there were pollution issues. And if I remember correctly, Sade, I see you in the chat, so please do correct me if I'm wrong, because you are in the Texas Tribune. But the stories were about pollution, environmental impact, air quality, that the state was not doing its job in getting the information needed for people to keep themselves safe, to keep their families safe, and in monitoring Cloverleaf, which I cannot remember the exact city in Texas, I think Austin. But the second part that stood out to me was the fact that it's a majority Hispanic community. And so immediately when I see that, I immediately think like, well, did what little the state was doing, did they make sure to also have it available in languages that people comprehend and understand and will be able to retain the information? And I say that because there are a lot of studies out there that look at the fact that, speaking of don't flatten people's experience, there have been a lot of studies from like Pew, other places, around the fact that within the Hispanic community, typically what they've seen is that someone who comes to the United States as an immigrant still, even if they're English, even if they are comfortable with English, they would rather read news in Spanish or like their native. Whereas someone who's more like me, who was born in the United States, even if I speak Spanish, oh, apologies, Sade, I'm so sorry. But even if that someone like me who, yes, I speak Spanish, but I was born in the United States, and so the preference for that like first generation would be to consume the news in English. And so that was something else that stood out to me too, is that in the reporting process, that they asked those questions, that they thought to make it a service to the people who it is for and not about them to someone else. That it was really bringing them into bringing their needs into the project.
I'm wondering, as you travel the country or certainly in conferences and you're talking about audience engagement, um, how is the backlash against DEI and these other kind of things that we're seeing being factored in? Are you seeing things slow down? Are you seeing people make a stronger effort to understand the need for diversity in communities? What are you hearing?
What I am observing is it seems like the conversation is trying to pivot more around diver the phrase diversity of thought. I'm starting to see creep up. And to me, that is a phrase that I think like, okay, well, let's unpack that. Let's define that. What do you mean when you say that? Because very often, especially within our industry in the United States, there is a perception, there are assumptions that everybody, pretty much everyone in the room, are, liberals as defined by the US political spectrum, registered Democrats. Um, but what does, you know, how do we navigate that? And so, um, to me, I think about the fact that like it's still trying to put it it's still trying to put it into a box without being willing to say we're putting it into a box, and we're putting into a box that has been defined by mostly people who have historically in this country like concentrated the power, who are middle upper class, um, very often white presenting, cisgender, heterosexual, and it's not that it's impossible. It's not about saying that just because you are part of those communities that we shouldn't that you can't be allies or that you can't be part of the conversation. But for me, when I see those kinds of conversations just like starting to take more space, um, it's when I say like, hey, let's take a minute to really define like what is being discussed here. Like this is how that phrase or like that line of um redefinition of DEI is showing up for me, and how I want to know how is it showing up? Like, what do you think you mean when you say that? Because this is how it's showing up for me. Um, and it very much is something that I think is also playing out just globally. We just had elections where the far right in the European Union made a lot more gains than I think people anticipated happening. But then on the flip side, you also see where in India, for example, Modi, Hindutva is a very big part of his party and their policies, their rhetoric. Um, yes, he won a third term, but like it wasn't a blowout win. So that's also something I want to make sure to bring in, is that a lot of the spaces that I'm in, a lot of the conversations I'm happening is still a bit is still very like US focused in a lot of ways. And like that in and of itself is its own privilege, and comes with its own assumptions of like this is how we're doing, or where do we need to go next. Um, not to and not to like take more time to share the answer, but again, from my childhood, something that I still think a lot about is how I grew up in Georgia and Florida. And so the history of the Civil War, the history of slavery in the US South, like I was very conscientious of that. And then in the Dominican Republic, it's a very different history and context that a lot of my cousins of my similar age, for them, they just weren't as close to that history. And so they would have questions whenever we would watch movies, like Remember the Titans, where they would just say, like, what do you mean you had a war and amendments? And what do you mean there's Jim Crow laws? And what theoretically should be a movie becomes like this like history lesson attempt to try to like bring them that context, and then to try to bring to me like their understanding from like Dominican history. Just that's just something that I do want to make sure we're also conscientious of, is as we are connecting with each other in more spaces, we are also bringing some of our own we're also bringing just some of our own baselines that might not be the same as other people's.
I want to bring some of our fellows in here. If I'm correct, Sarah, uh, there are some audience engagement efforts going on at your paper. I think I've seen one of your LinkedIn posts where you talked about we're on the road today to. Can you share some information with us?
Yeah, um, we're it's part of we're still figuring it out. I'll introduce myself. I'm Sarah Albashbishi. I'm at Mountain State Spotlight, which is a nonprofit newsroom based in West Virginia, covering the state. And so a big push this year, but also in general, is to expand readership. And that's hard for us because we specifically attract like a specific demographic, um, you know, people who are, you know, uh, I mean, the state doesn't really have the most, a lot of like minority groups, but primarily our readership is like white, left leaning, and probably more, wealthier than most of the average in the state. And so we're trying to branch from that because we're trying to reach communities that maybe don't get a lot of information or news, and that's hard, seeing as the state has issues with internet and service and things like that. And we're talking about communities where like towns are like 15 people. I was being dramatic. It's not actually 15 people, maybe 100. I don't know. But so this election year, we've decided to take the citizens' agenda in our election coverage. So explaining to folks what that means, saying that we want to hear what you want to talk about, what we should go ask candidates, and then producing that. And so we made a promise to hit and visit all 55 counties in the state by the general election. And so in part of doing that, I started posting. I went on like trips back to back, and I started posting pictures and where we were going and what counties and why we were doing it. And then in addition, how do you get in touch with us if you missed us? And it was on Twitter. Not a lot of folks in West Virginia are like necessarily on Twitter. Facebook is a better way, but it was my way of trying to make sure folks saw that we were what we were doing, and engaged with that, because we weren't producing a story every trip. Because it was, it's part of it is source building, and part of it is story ideas, and then the other part of it is we have to fundraise because we're a nonprofit. And so and that has spread to the rest of the newsroom, and we've started talking about how to get exposure and how to kind of expand what we're doing to reach as many people. And so I post, I hate doing it, but I try really hard to do like a daily recap. If I did a trip to 4 counties, and every time I left a county, I like would post things, so that people knew that we were engaging, but also kind of like, we're seeing the sites and things like that. And so that's what, sorry, that was a long spiel, but that was what Rachel is kind of getting at. And then we then revisit when we do a piece that was related to that trip. I will like tweet back out and I go, hey, like, remember this? This is our follow up. Read all about it here, etc. And so that's something that I've been doing. So sorry for anyone who follows me.
Nicole, before you jump back in, I want to ask Sarah, do you get the same level of fulfillment or satisfaction, or however you want to characterize it, by doing these efforts that you would get from working on a really good, meaty story?
Um, I think yes and no. I think like the level of fulfillment is not the same as like I think I do feel a sense of fulfillment when I do it, just maybe not the same level as a story. Um, but I do get a sense of fulfillment that these, especially in these like communities that feel maybe left out or not focused on, like especially for someone who's not originally from West Virginia, I think it's really important that I show folks that I'm in the communities, I'm trying to do the work, I'm trying to connect with as many people as I can. And hey, look, I came down. It's a 3-hour drive, but I did it today. And I spent the next 2 days talking to folks and doing these things. And um, I got to see this and appreciating the state. So like I get that sense of fulfillment. I will also say like sometimes it's frustrating because I'm not, it's exhausting. It's not frustrating. I'm just sometimes it's exhausting to remember to take pictures and to remember because like a picture is going to go a long way. But I would rather spend that energy figuring out what my next story is and things like that. And so it's like a twofold. So yes, I think it helps fill in the gaps because we're not a daily, so we don't write a piece every single day. But so in that sense, yes, but it is really hard to pivot and to include that because I'm not very social like media um focused in general. Like it takes a lot of me to like remember to do it. Um, I think that hopefully that answers your question.
Nicole, what do you think of her journey into audience engagement?
I think what's really critical is to also think about your role in that community. And it please correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is a little bit of a I think what I hear is that you're not quite certain if it's actually reaching the communities that you want it to, and in ways that are impactful. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
Like my specific posts or like the stories or articles.
Like specifically around the posts on Twitter, and tell
Um,
me a little bit more about the articles. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about, so specifically about the posts. I mean, the primary social media, and I actually have done this reflection, and in theory, when things die down slightly more, you making a Facebook page and doing that would be a lot more effective in the state because that's what West Virginians tend to use. That's the social media of choice. However, I think more people across the state have engaged with me. I don't necessarily know if it's specifically that community that I left. It just kind of depends. I mean, I went into a community several times and they told me they don't do internet. So I'm printing out my article that I wrote and mailing it to them. So that I know for a fact that they're not going to get on Twitter and see my tweet, but I have engaged with a lot more people in general. So like it is effective, but is it targeting the exact folks that I want? I mean, I can't say. And then um in terms of our articles, you're talking about a state that, I mean, there's a paper that closes in a community every other day. Um, that needs, I mean, it's a news desert. It needs more news, sources. It needs more journalists. You're talking about communities who don't have access to internet. They don't have service. So even if we're an online source, they're not getting that because that's not the way that they do things. We're also talking about an aging population. Um, so we try to engage with as many people and make sure that we're covering the entire state and saying, hey, we did write about this. Here you go. But we're trying to make sure that we're not rewriting what the other outlets are doing, and trying to focus on filling those gaps. So sometimes, I do take 2 weeks to do a story because I'm doing it kind of more of a project and I'm talking to people across 6 counties instead of just one. And so sometimes when you're not producing stories every other day, it's hard to, like, sometimes you like have to be like, hey, we're relevant again. But I think that answers your question.
I think especially that connection around like engaging with the community. I know it sounds like trying to first of all, like trying to reach all 55 counties. Like, my goodness. I wonder if there's a way to also develop partnerships. I know West Virginia in particular is a state where you are not it is not hyperbolic to say like every other day it seems like another news outlet has closed its doors. But something that is also coming up a lot is partnerships. Like, one of the examples that I showed with the Baltimore Banner was a partnership with the New York Times. And the reason why I say that is just in terms of logistics and like preserving your like time and energy to think about like what is the next story that I'm pursuing, and to get ready for. Uh, I also wonder, if there's a way, if you're comfortable with it, or if your outlet would be comfortable with it, of having like an unofficial focus group in some ways, like keep, all of these people who you interact with, if there's a way to develop some kind of like database or, ongoing contact sheet, and figuring out, so even though internet service is really spotty, it's not a guarantee. Okay, is there a way that we could set up some kind of a cadence of calls for people to join in? Like, could a phone call work? Um, to have people just sort of weigh in on some things, or to help share insights into like common questions that you have about your own organization, of like, hey, how are we showing up for you? And also like, what are the things that are being missed, that we should be taking a look at? And how do those needs change over time? I know there have been efforts to try to expand broadband, and maybe they will work out. So like, maybe you won't have to do the phone call like for everybody all the time. But
I wanted to ask Olivia if you would give us some more details about the project that Nusrat was talking
Sure.
about.
So it's called the Mobile Newsroom. This is its third year. And so basically we partnered, like you said, with the public libraries. Our partnership with the public libraries actually won an award from the National Library Association for community engagement in 2022. But basically, we go to the libraries in communities that are predominantly minority communities that we don't typically have a lot of reporters that live in those areas, or reporters that are just naturally in those areas. We set up for 2 weeks at a time. So today's actually the first day of our mobile newsroom session for 2024. So they're out in the southwest area of Louisville at the regional library. There's 3 reporters and I think 1 editor today, and they're sitting out there. We advertise in advance. We take flyers to the library. The library passes them out with people when they check out books. We also write a little story about it, like, hey, the mobile newsroom is coming back. Here's our schedule for 2024. We publish that story several times and like bring it back and republish it again so you can see it again. And then we sit out there, bring business cards, our laptops. Last year we were doing some survey stuff because we were trying to figure out what sort of topics / beat areas that people are most important or most interested in. So when they would come to the table, we'd help them fill out the little 5-question survey, and then we use that data internally to shape some of our coverage and our goals for 2024. But this year, we're just focused on getting story ideas and learning from the community. Lots of engagement stuff that we saw. Like last year, we had a man come and tell us that the water had never been turned on at the park, and it was a park in a low-income area. And they were like, we can't use the bathroom, we can't wash our hands, we can't have water from the water fountains. It's hot, like SOS. And a reporter wrote up a story, called the city, And the same day that she reached out, the water got turned on, and this man said he had been calling for years and actually had phone log records that proved he had been calling for years. And then a reporter calls, and same day it's turned on. So there was that impact. I did a story about this one highway that used to be a major business corridor in the city, and then it got really dilapidated, and now it's predominantly Hispanic, and there's tons of just like businesses that are only in Spanish. Like there's no there's no other language option. And then I looked at how this community is actually contributing more to the tax base than small business owners who are not Hispanic, and was able to find a bunch of data to show how much, like how many billions of dollars that one stretch of highway was actually contributing to the tax base, and how these workers were legal and helping the city in a way that the big businesses that abandoned it left it in squalor. We've done stories about, like, there's just all types of different things, but it's been incredibly successful for us. And it's one of those things, like recently we had someone from the audience engagement team for all of Gannett reach out to our newsroom about it. So I think it's starting to catch wind that it's been able to be successful. And we've had tons of stories that hit high page views. Then we also have stories that get insanely long engagement times. And I'm talking like upwards of 4 minute plus engagement times. So yeah, so it's been incredibly successful for us. And I've just been fortunate to be a part of it for the last 3 years.
Sitting here listening to Olivia, I get the feeling that I'm listening to the future editor of the Louisville Courier. The girl has got those numbers and those bravo. I'm gonna wind this up by asking you, Nicole. I think the members of the Widening the Pipeline Fellowship are doing a remarkable job of modeling the fact that the gatekeepers matter, and even within efforts to diversify audiences and to reach out and to gain readers, if the people running audience engagement campaigns are not diverse, we won't have the proper impact. So take us away on that thought. What do these young people need to think about in terms of maybe moving their careers in that direction?
All of you are here because you are bringing voices, not just your own voice, but also your family, your friends, just people you were acquaintances with, school experiences that we are missing. And by virtue of us missing that, we are actually not doing our jobs at all as journalists when we say that when we say that our mission is to be truth tellers, when we say that our mission is to give context to and complexity and reality of what people are dealing with. So I have absolutely been in situations where in my own head, I'm thinking, no, just don't say anything, just don't say anything, just like better to stay quiet, better to like be in a corner. No, speak, like find your allies, find people to help gut check you on things. Nusrat, please let me know how that goes with that conversation at the Detroit Free Press, because if you do not speak up, we are still in a situation where like there is nobody else like you who is going to do that on behalf of the communities who have been locked out. So it's a big order, but please do find a way to give that voice.
And on that note, Nicole Hernandez, the news editor for digital and audience engagement with AP, you have been an invaluable addition to the Widening the Pipeline Fellowship experience. And we want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy Monday.
We'll be in touch.